We talking about Law and Order. I need that little thing from the Law and Order show, the don't like I need that right now. Because I am about to bring some heat. Really giving us all the nuggets, dropping bars about what we need to do to be successful in our businesses. Man, I've been in business for 23 years. It's my fourth startup. A lot of people know, and I got my background on this time. So University Startups, that's my tech company. Yeah, many of y'all know that, my ed tech company. And I still got a whole lot to learn about the legal end of what we need to do to be successful as businesses. Because when I got a question, I just go ask a lawyer. So I don't really know 100% what I need to be doing all the time. So, I'm happy to be able to learn something today as well. All right, so what I'm gonna do to get us kicked off is I'm gonna read a little bit of the bio, because we want to make sure we give our guest a proper introduction, Miss Ambur Smith. So if you don't mind, Amber, I'm gonna embarrass you right now for a second. So Ambur Smith, ESQ, is a social entrepreneur, attorney, and political strategist, fascinated by the intersections of identity, law, and politics. In 2020, Ambur founded a virtual business and intellectual property law firm to empower founder-led startups, grant-funded nonprofits, and creative entrepreneurs to protect their billion-dollar ideas and legally prepare them for success wherever there is Wi-Fi. She has since helped dozens of diverse founders across industries, from businesses comply with evolving regulations, file trademarks, and negotiate good deals one after another. And there's definitely some founders on here that I've talked to that need some of that advice. Prior to the forming of her own firm, Ambur served as a commercial finance and banking associate for, is it Dismore and Show? Okay, Dismore and Show LLP, where she counseled Fortune 100 companies, financial institutions, and diverse business owners navigating business and cannabis regulations. All right, Ambur is licensed to practice law in DC and Ohio and is a proud graduate of Hampton University. I don't know if we got any Howard on right now, but I ain't going to get into the whole real HU. That's always going to be a thing, but I'm a yield back. And Georgetown University Law Center, where she got her JD. Following her firm on LinkedIn and Meta platforms. Follow her. Okay, got it. I'm sorry. Follow her firm on LinkedIn and Meta platforms. All right, it's at Ambur Smith Law, but I'll let her go into that, ambursmithlaw.com, to learn more. So we'll definitely talk about that at the end, how people can connect to you. Miss Ambur. Oh, wait a minute. I'm gonna let Keontae bring you up. I want him to say something special before we get into it.
Oh yeah, no problem. As y'all know, if you've been on a Founder Fridays, we also got to add a little personal touch on how we met the speaker, and just to continue to boost them up and encourage them as well, and let them know that we're appreciative. And so I met Ambur at DC Startup Week at a happy hour. Actually, as a pinpoint for anybody that's an entrepreneur trying to get into the space, DC Startup Week is next month. So just a shameless plug. We'll drop the link in the chat.
Get your tickets.
To be. Go get those tickets. It's not much. It's only $25 early bird. And the network that you build is way more valuable than just the $20 that you're spending. So just a pinpoint to DC Startup Week, but back to Ambur. I met Ambur at DC Startup Week at a happy hour. And the cool thing that I really appreciate about Ambur is I told her about our mission for Founder Fridays, what we were working on. And she said, let's do it. Sign me up. And I love that energy. It speaks volumes to how Hampton is about their business. They own it then, so I appreciate that, because a lot of people, Tremaine knows, will ask people, hey, can y'all come speak to, whether it be people who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs, and they'll kind of push back, hey, let me check my schedule, this and that. And so Ambur straight up said, I'll do it. Lock me in, just let me know a date. And so all that to say, Ambur, we truly appreciate you. And as the audience continues to fill up, or whether people just come back and watch the recap, I know that you have some amazing feedback for them today. And so just wanted to give you your flowers and let you know that you are appreciated, being proactive, taking out your time, and just coming to share your expertise with us. It's truly appreciated. So we thank you. And so without further ado, I present to you all Ambur C. Smith, Esquire. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Wow. I mean, I'll come back every week if this is the introduction and the hospitality I receive. I love my flowers, as you can tell. So thank you. Thank you. Again. But no, thank you all for also creating the platform. You know, in addition to being an attorney, I'm a founder myself, and I understand how difficult it is to get the advice and the resources that you need. Especially, you know, when you are one of your major investors, right? So definitely want to help kind of demystify some of these questions you may have around, you know, really, again, protecting those billion-dollar ideas and legally preparing for success. So Keontae has been kind enough to share just some preliminary questions that you all may have shared with him in other forums. And so that's kind of what I've created a short presentation around. And so, you know, feel free to use the chat to ask questions as I'm sharing some information. Again, just some do's and don'ts. But then we're going to open the floor up for questions. So, you know, I definitely want you all to feel comfortable to elaborate on what we're discussing and, you know, ask follow-up questions. I will say I have to, you know, offer a disclaimer. You know, nothing that I tell you today should be relied upon in exchange for speaking to an attorney one-on-one. So, you know, I'll definitely provide my information so that you can schedule a consultation if that's something that interests you. But, you know, there's nothing in place of developing that, you know, customizable relationship with an attorney. So I will repeatedly encourage you all to do that. But in the meantime, I think it's important for you all to attend events like this. And there is some very valuable information that I intend to share. So excited to just kind of jump in so that we can get to the questions, because I'm sure you all are going to have any. And so with that, so let me go ahead and share my screen. And then we'll get right to it. Give me 1 second. So can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, let me present. Okay, perfect. So you all can see this picture? Okay, perfect. Yep. So again, today's presentation is entitled Law and Order, Legal Do's and Don'ts, specifically for startups, right? And it's funny because law and order, when we think about that, we think of an attorney going to court, and I do the opposite. I try to keep my clients out of court. I'm here to support folks in terms of transactional matters, negotiating good deals that people will hopefully, that, you know, that is mutually beneficial, so people don't have any reason to breach the agreement and things run smoothly, right? But in worst case scenario, disputes do arise. And so that's why you have agreements. That's why you have some of these things in place. So I'm going to talk about some things that hopefully will prevent you from really having to deal with your own type of law and order type situation, okay? So, you know, thank you all so much for, you know, those kind introductions. For those who may have missed it, these are just a couple highlights, just to guys give you a bit more information or just kind of some key things to give you an idea of who I am. I'm not sure that it was mentioned. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so I don't know if anyone here is from the Midwest. Shout out to the Midwest. You know, I think that definitely speaks to culturally, just kind of my background and my perspective on things. My parents are from Chicago, and so I moved out east as soon as I went to college and have kind of been out here ever since, although I did spend a couple of years in Ohio immediately after law school, working for the law firm that Tremaine mentioned. And so, you know, and that's that big law alumna where that speaks to, which is, you know, a really major law firm that gives you a lot of exposure. It's like baptism by fire, right? And so, you know, I had those experiences. And then in addition, I also coach folks who are attempting to practice law, who are also future attorneys, and then small businesses. So, you know, this is right up my alley in terms of, you know, providing some sort of coaching and things of that nature, in addition to just more traditional legal services. And of course, I'm a nonprofit board member. I'm an advisory board member for an organization. And so, you know, as I mentioned, my goal is really to just, you know, help empower folks and really bridge the gap between small businesses and the resources and the information that they need. So that's just a little bit more about me, right? But I want to know who's in the audience. So I know that we've got, you know, some founders, perhaps, maybe individuals that are looking to invest in founders. And so I want to know specifically today who's in the audience. So if you can maybe share if you have already started a business, or maybe you're just at the ideation phase. That's going to be important because I want to make sure that I'm sharing hypotheticals and things that are really pertinent. So, hey, Jace, I see a Chicago native. Okay, so the Midwest is represented. And yeah, feel free to tell me where you're from. all of that
I
matters.
was gonna go ahead and just introduce myself real quick. So again, my name is Chase. I'm a founder of Couture Express, which is a beauty vending machine that'll provide beauty hair care products on college campuses. And I'm really interested in this conversation today because I honestly need some legal advice. So yeah, I'm trying to absorb all the knowledge I can.
No, absolutely. Well, you're in the right place, Jace. Again, I don't know if you missed that disclaimer, right? This is not going to, per se replace having a one-on-one conversation with myself or another attorney, following today's conversation, but hopefully it will absolutely, spark some important ideas in terms of how to protect yourself legally. So I think you're in the right place. Okay, so we got a DC native here. All right, Nikki's in the ideation phase. Keontae is both a founder and investor. Okay. And so, please feel free to continue to drop in the chat. But, this is really important, right? Because, depending on what stage you are in business, that is going to dictate, what you should be thinking about. But, the information I'm sharing today is pretty universally applicable. And, I think also what I find a lot of times I have clients who have maybe skipped some steps, right? Like they've jumped ahead, they've been extremely excited around the products or services they're offering, and getting in business and marketing. And so today is really going to be about just making sure that we kind of have a high level understanding of what the process looks like to really establish a solid foundation. Okay, so Sterling is from Detroit. Okay, more Midwest folks. And he's the founder of T.H.E.M, which is a booking management platform for musicians and live music venues. Please feel free to visit feeder.co. So you all check him out in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing that information. I will absolutely be sure to check out your website, Sterling. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. But yeah, so this is great. So you have some amazing ideas. Looks like we've got folks across industries, right? Jace mentioned that she has a beauty company, and we've got folks, and Sterling is more entertainment, right? All of which are industries that I am exposed to on a day-to-day basis. So this is really exciting. I'm gonna call one more person. Looks like Barb is here from Baltimore. Hey, Barb. She's the founder of a swimwear business and coaching business. I love it. So we've got a diverse group here. And we've got more folks dropping in the chat. Hey, John. And so again, continue to share in the comments. Please respond to some of the do's and don'ts that I share, because as I mentioned, we're going to try to keep things high level. And so, to the extent there's anything more specific, that's what we can deal with during the question period. But this is going to hopefully, again, just kind of give us an idea of some major things that we all should be keeping in mind. Okay. So with that said, I mentioned that my firm, we have two major goals, right? It's protecting your billion-dollar ideas. And I think it's important that we put that B on the front of that, right? Because we don't want to limit ourselves and our potential, which can happen sometimes when you're early stage, in the early stages of starting your business. It can be hard to see kind of what your true potential is. But a lot of times, your potential is dictated by how you start, right? And the foundation that you create for yourself. And that means even before you have a full-on organization formed, right? That can also include, just when you're at that ideation phase. So I know some of you all are there. So this portion is going to talk about, say for instance, you're not even at a point of choosing an entity structure, things that nature. You just have an idea. I think there's some important things for us to consider. So let me make sure. All right. So let's start out with just like a few key do's. Okay. Let's start with some do's. Hey, Sheila. Oh, Sheila's sharing her information in the chat. So do, right? So when we're talking about ideas, we're talking about intellectual property. So how many people, just put in the chat, maybe put a 1 if you're familiar with the concept and roughly like what intellectual property means. And of course, the short acronym for intellectual property is just IP. I'm sure you all are seeing this, especially those who are more, traditionally, considered a tech company, right? A lot of folks are going to be a bit more familiar with it in that space. But I'm here to say that to the extent that you have a business idea or whatever, you all have some form of intellectual property, right? And so intellectual property is really going to be those creations of the mind, right? Whether that is, your company name or a product that your company sells, the name of that product, right? It could be the slogan that you use that goes along with your company name that people associate with you. It's like Burger King's "Have It Your Way," right? Like that's their slogan. And then maybe it's your logo. So in the same way, like we think of a Pepsi, right? And you have the logo, the circle and we all know what the Pepsi logo is, right? Those are the things that are going to be specifically could be protected through trademark. And we'll talk about different ways to protect your intellectual property. But that is what we want to think about. And so even before you start marketing, right, you have creations of the mind. You have these different ideas that are going to become hopefully synonymous with your business or the products that your business are selling, or even the services that you're providing, right? And so one of the things that we want to do when we're starting out is we want to just take inventory of what those creations of the mind are. And so that can look like pulling out a pen and some paper, right? And jotting down the different things that you associate with your business. Okay. And to the extent that, say for instance, let's see, we've got, Barb is founder of a swimwear business and a coaching business, right? So if she has names associated with her different swimsuits, right? Like that is a form of intellectual property, hypothetically, especially if it's something that's going to be unique, to her company, right? Instead of just calling it a one piece, right? It could be Barb's one piece, right? That could hypothetically be a form of intellectual property that she would want to consider protecting. Now, even if you don't know how to go about doing that, the key is to just identify it, right? And have that list somewhere for you to reference, okay? And so after you start to take intellectual or inventory of your intellectual property, then that's when you want to start move on to the idea of maybe trademarking these different forms of these different creations of the mind. And arguably you should be doing this before you start marketing. And so, I alluded to the idea that a lot of times I have clients who have, already in business, have already started promoting themselves, have already started promoting the things that they offer to the market, but they've not taken the initiative to protect themselves. And so what happens? You fall victim to, or you expose yourself to copycats, right? To other people that want to monetize your ideas. And the reality is that even once you protect yourself through trademarking or other forms of intellectual property protection, which I'll mention, you can't prevent other people from being inspired by you and ultimately trying to steal your ideas. But when you do take the extra step to file a trademark or things of that nature, you have certain rights, additional rights beyond just those that you can automatically have as somebody who created something, but you have a right in court. And so that's something really important to understand. And it's going to also give you the ability to maybe license your ideas, right? Like if you own your ideas, if you trademark them, you have a federal trademark registration, then you could say, hey, if you want to use my ideas, it belongs to me, but maybe you're in a different market. Maybe you can help expand my business. So you're licensed to use my name, or you're licensed to use my slogan or what have you for a campaign and things of that nature. But you can speak from the perspective of an owner of your intellectual property, as opposed to someone who is, on the back end, trying to make up for lost time and hope that someone would be held accountable for something that you hadn't taken the initiative to protect. And so I mentioned trademarks because I personally specialize in trademarking, which is something that requires federal registration in order for you to enjoy protection nationwide. But there's other forms of intellectual property protection that you may have heard about, right? Like patents or copywriting, right? And so that typically depends on the type of creation, right, that you're trying to create. So something more scientific, with more an architectural design, things of nature, those are things that will fall more into into the patent category. And so that also requires a different specialization among attorneys. But as you can tell, all companies will have the type of intellectual property that falls into the trademark realm to some extent. So it's definitely a more inclusive form of intellectual property protection. And then copywriting, of course, if you're in the business, if you're creating some sort of written materials, right? If you're writing books, if you're a manuscript, things of those nature, those things can be subject to copywriting. So, we're going to try to keep things high level today, But just to give you an idea, those also fall into the category of things that you might want to protect before you start marketing. Okay. Another thing that you want to do.
Can I ask a quick question, Amber?
Yeah, please do.
While you right there on that spot, like I raised my hand, lower my hand. While you right there on that spot, I mean, these days, like social media is like really big. So, you know, TikTok, you know, Instagram, Facebook, well, not so much Facebook anymore, but you know, social media is what it is. But can you talk about like copywriting and what that means as far as like using other people's content and reposting, like stuff that we probably do all the time? But I don't know the legal behind it, and probably many people don't, you know, about, you know, content, because everybody's creating content these days. So I guess when it comes to intellectual property, we're all creating it like all the time now and posting it online, and you know what I mean? So like in the world that we live in today, how can some of this be like relevant for like right now? Because everybody's gonna get off of this and post something for their business. You know what I mean? Like we're gonna all do it today, you know.
Absolutely. And so as I mentioned, you know, you want to think about these things before you start marketing and sharing them far and wide, because once you put them out into the market, you don't have much control over them, right? And of course, you, on the bright side, right, that means that other people that could purchase your products or support your, you know, business will have exposure, but then also individuals who might see themselves as competitors could. So it really is just a matter of having some discretion, as we'll talk about, you know, and just making sure that you have contemplated some of these things before you start putting it out into the market, because you won't have control at that point. But you can imagine when people are posting on social media, they want people to share, right? You would imagine. But if you're unprepared legally, you might be putting yourself in a difficult predicament. So it's just something to be considerate of, and to be mindful that, yeah, it's like toothpaste. Once it's out the tube, there's nothing you can do about it, right? So let's just be mindful. Let's be mindful, okay? And so with that said, it's also like, as you're having certain conversations, again, before you formed a company, you know, you might still be just, you know, wrapping your mind around certain ideas. And so you want to run those ideas past other people who maybe could be investors or could be partners, right? An NDA. So how many people are familiar with an NDA, or a non-disclosure agreement? Okay, and again, you could pop a 1 in the chat. You know, and so, you know, people talk about this, but an NDA is an agreement that essentially says we're going to keep this between us, right? Without, it's not just, you know, a wink or whatever, a handshake. It is a legal document that's going to affirm that both parties understand that what we're talking about is confidential, and we don't plan to share it on social media, right? Like, you know, you don't need a recording of your meeting showing up on social media, and an NDA is going to make sure that you know, you would assume everybody has written the document before they sign it, but at the very least, they can be held accountable to certain confidentiality standards. So having an NDA template on hand before you have this conversation is going to allow for you to more easily, you know, do this last item, which is require that it be executed before you have certain conversations. Okay. And you know, I'm sure we all have those instances, right? You know, you're around people, and that's not to say that, you know, you're talking to, you know, your mom or whatever about something. You're like, "Hey, mom, here's an NDA." You know, you would imagine that there are certain situations, but the reality is, if your mom is going to be an investor, right? If you all are seriously having a conversation around these different things, it doesn't hurt. You know, a lot of this is also about creating good business habits. Okay, and so, you know, early on, when you're having these ideas and you're still figuring out how to protect them, an NDA is going to be a good way to do that. Okay. So let's see. All right. So another, a few more things, a few more do's. Okay. So use discretion during these business conversations. So I mentioned, you know, first we're starting out by having an NDA in place. So that's check 1. Okay. Then you get them to execute it. Right. So now we know that whether they, you know, the goal is that everybody has read it through, maybe read it through with an attorney if they're skeptical about different clauses or whatever the case may be. And so, you know, once you've signed the NDA, that should give you a bit more comfort in terms of what you can share, right? Because again, everything is going to be governed by that document. But it still, you know, would behoove you to think, I don't need to share every, you know, idea that I have with a particular investor, especially if they're looking at investing in a certain aspect of your idea, right? Or if you're consulting someone else who, you know, arguably is running a competitive business in order to gain some insight, you know, around this idea. Again, you don't need to share every detail of your business, because a legal document is only effective insofar as, you can enforce it, right? But also individuals are trustworthy, and sometimes you don't figure that out until after they've breached it, right? So use discretion, share what's necessary, in the same way you court people, in your private life, right? You need to court business partners and investors in a similar way. So, even when you have an NDA, make sure that you're using discretion. And with that, to the extent that someone is extremely reluctant to sign an NDA, right? Or someone just outright refuses an NDA, that's a red flag, right? That's a red flag that this person is probably going to be difficult to deal with. This person doesn't understand the importance of confidentiality in business, right? And so those are things that should probably trigger that this isn't somebody you should be sharing this information with, right? And so that's a key red flag, and that's why being ready to present an NDA is a good thing to do early on, because it helps you reveal those red flags early on, okay? And then, of course, as I mentioned, right, attending events like this, right, things that are going to continue to remind you of best practices, especially as you're being mindful of expenses early on, right? And you're like, hey, I don't have time to sit down with an attorney every single day, but when you have opportunities to engage with an attorney in forums like this or otherwise, definitely take advantage of them, okay? But with that said, right, it doesn't take the place of consulting with your own attorney or a prospective attorney, right? And so take advantage of complimentary consultations. My firm offers initial complimentary 15-minute consultations, right? Just to kind of gauge if there's synergy between the type of support that you need and the support our firm offers. And most firms will do the same, right? So you can typically have that initial call, a discovery call, free of charge to some extent, but it's invaluable in terms of being pointed in the right direction. And then ultimately, I think we also have to be mindful, to the extent that you have these different ideas that you're developing, it's really important for you to view this as an investment, okay? In your future self, your future business, or what have you. I know when you're starting a business, especially if you're bootstrapping it, right, you recognize just, the expenses are racking up. But I would argue, and I would definitely encourage you to see protecting your intellectual property, right, consulting with an attorney as an investment in your business and not just another expense, okay? So I know that was a good amount of information. I've got another set of do's and don'ts. So at this point, please definitely drop in the chat if you have any questions. Now, Keontae, he has put a link in there to a to a resource that you can use. And I will speak, I'm happy to, kind of speak to some of the different options that you do have. But it is something to be said, you can find templates, things like that online, but it is always great to have an actual attorney make sure they're reviewing you. So if you're opting for programs like LegalZoom, they sometimes have options, right, where you can meet with a real attorney, or, right, firms like mine, things of that nature, where that there's going to be someone to give you some personal support is really important. Keontae said right still. But no, absolutely. And that's the thing. Early on, you can find templates in different places and then get those reviewed. So, it's always great to be mindful of what resources they have. But yes, we definitely want to start putting that on our radar. But with that said, right, so we've talked about kind of the do's in terms of protecting your $1 billion ideas. And I did ask if y'all had some questions. But as you all jot those in the chat, I'm going to share kind of the don'ts for this particular portion, right? So sharing your intellectual property just all casually, all willy-nilly, right? At the bar, at the happy hour, right? Imagine, Keontae, you and I were speaking kind of high level about the different things that we're doing. We were identifying synergies, and we've come together to create, this opportunity for everybody here today. Okay, so, but it was intentional, right? And I don't believe there were any trade secrets shared. That's another form of intellectual property I didn't necessarily mention, but your customer list, right? Like who your existing clients are, that's a form of intellectual property, And so you want to make sure that once those type of things come into conversation, that's when those NDAs come out. That's when we are getting more serious. But if it's high level, that's appropriate for individuals that you haven't vetted in any way. But otherwise, we don't want to be sharing things too casually. Verbal agreements, right, is another misstep. Is the opposite of sharing an NDA or what have you. Is saying like, this is between me and you. It could easily turn into he said, she said, right? And so we want to be mindful of that. And of course, in a court of law, when there's no written agreement, what they're going to consider is kind of the totality of the circumstances, right? Like, would a reasonable person under the circumstances think that, this was confidential if you said it at a bar, if you said it in a room full of people? No, it doesn't sound like you were conscious of your privacy. So, why should anyone, help you protect it, right? So we want to make sure that we're entering into written agreements. And then, of course, as far as don't now, Keontae shared a resource. Going to an actual attorney is great to find templates. But I don't fully recommend, with that in mind, I don't recommend just finding a random template online. Now, granted, when it comes to confidentiality, things like that, there's going to be a lot of language that you're going to see that's pretty similar across documents. And that's important. But depending on what industry you're in, right, depending on the specifics of your business, there's likely going to be something missing from just a template you find online. So if you do have some sort of template that you've identified, I would advise you to have it reviewed at the very least as you're using it. And again, with that said, as you're doing these things, putting these different things in place, continue to view it as an investment and not just another cost or expense in your business. So Jewel asks, does written contracts or meeting minutes supersede verbal agreements? That is a great question, Jewel. And so in most cases, right? And that's because, again, it's, there's going to be clear evidence that it exists. And depending on the amount of money may be in question. So, right, once you're beyond the NDA stage and you have like an actual service agreement, things like that, depending on the amount, some agreements have to be in writing. And there's this idea of like the statute of frauds, but I won't bore you all with that. And so with that in mind, that would absolutely supersede any other verbal agreement around that. And then, of course, like meeting minutes, things of that nature could also serve to just kind of represent the conversation. So, if you're sending a follow-up email and saying, today we discussed this and we've agreed to this, that is in its own way a form of agreement. And of course, if that other person acknowledges that email thread in the absence of like a formal document could also suffice to prove that you all, had a meeting of the minds. That's kind of what the purpose of a contract is. So those are good questions. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, especially if, in terms of the order in which these different agreements were made, the written agreement is going to supersede. Okay. All right. So with that said, okay, so we talked about, kind of protecting your $1 billion ideas. So that's before, you've really crystallized them and you're kind of just, maybe bouncing ideas off of people, things of that nature, or, you do consider them intellectual property, but you are still operating kind of in your individual capacity. But now let's think about how do we prepare for success more so from an entity's perspective? Like once you have this idea that, you want to protect, now it's time to try and shield yourself from some liability maybe and think about forming an actual business. So some of the things we want to do, right, when we're thinking of dues. So you want to choose an available business name. And I know that sounds obvious, right? But you believe it or not, that's not something that people often do, especially when it comes to a product or service that they plan to sell, right, nationwide or whatever, but they're forming in a certain state, because there are 2 ways to determine if a name is available. If a name, and this could also relate to maybe a product name, right, that's within your business. So you could search, your Secretary of State's website in whatever state that you're in, or whatever, analogous agency in like a DC is going to be. That's where you can search to see, what business names are available. So you can jot down, you can, search your entity using those website databases to see if it's available. But then when we talk about, intellectual property, or when you're getting more into like the names, the logos, then you also can search using the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's website. Okay. And so when you're thinking about a product name that you're wanting to trademark, you don't just want to check your state's website, because you can imagine that's only going to show you what's available, within the borders of your state. But then there's also going to be, you want to think about on a federal level, if this is a business name or idea that's been protected by someone who doesn't live in your state. Okay. And that's absolutely something that an attorney can help with, but these are things that you can do on your own for sure, at least at a very general level. All right. And so once you've done that, right, and you know that your business name is available, and to the extent that you've already formed your business and maybe you didn't do that, or, if you formed a business, likelihood, that means that the name was available on that state level. It's still, it might make sense for you to double check what's happening on a federal level in case you want to create an alias for your business to operate, on a grander scale, right? A DBA, which is, stands for doing business as, things of that nature can be workarounds, to the extent that certain availability doesn't exist on a federal level. But these are things that you want to be considering. And then from that point, right, you're thinking you want to choose an entity structure. And so I typically will recommend that clients, operate either as an LLC or a corporation. If you're not familiar with the differences, the key is that there are a lot more formalities involved in a corporation, but there's also the opportunity of you going public, right? So all those companies that are traded at the stock exchange, things of that nature, right? Those were corporations so that they could have public offerings and you can have as many shareholders, quite frankly, as will buy into your business, or at least as many as you've authorized shares for. Okay, so it looks like Tremaine says, what if someone has the same name, but it's in a different industry? That's a good question, Tremaine. That's a great question. And so again, when it comes to your ability to form a company and things of nature, the name availability on the state level is probably going to dictate whether or not you can register it or if you have to, tweak it a bit. But at least with trademarking, there is the option, hypothetically, you could have the same name as an existing business, but if it's in a different category of goods or services, then you may still be able to trademark it. So that's something really important to consider and to pull out. Great question, Tremaine. And the best example that I have is when we think of Dove soap versus Dove chocolates, right? Those aren't the same company, they're not owned by the same people. They're both household names, right? But we don't confuse them with one another. You never, it's like if I'm looking for soap, I know I'm going to Unilever's Dove, right? And then in terms of chocolate, it's a different aisle. It's a whole different, I'm in a different mindset when I'm looking for chocolate. Well, yeah, most of the time. So with that said, that is why the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's examining attorney was like, these two things aren't going to confuse consumers. So we'll allow for both of these companies to trademark that name. So that's something to consider. So you're not completely out of luck as long as you are looking to trademark something in a different industry. Okay. So we've considered these things. Now we understand whether or not things are available. We're feeling more confident, right? We've talked to an attorney about whether or not we should be an LLC or a corporation, depending on what our investment goals are long-term. And then from that point, then it's time to form an actual entity. And both LLCs and corporations shield you as an individual from liability, right? And so that's the biggest thing about being in business is like, as much as you have the opportunity to make all this money, you also have the ability to be held accountable for anything that goes wrong, right, as relates to your products or services. And with that comes liability or responsibility in a monetary way, right? So we want to shield ourselves, and that's where an entity is going to help you shield yourself from that liability. And so with that said, so some other things that you can do now that you're operating as an entity, right, is you want to open that business bank account, okay? And these are things that are going to help make sure that you are in a position to, differentiate between your personal expenses, right? Because there are tax implications to running a business that you need to be concerned with. And so the key is to just create separate identities for yourself and your business, okay? And so the business bank account is going to be a part of that. Which institutions and things of that nature that you use are something, that you want to, consider your different goals and, maybe consult a financial advisor, a tax or accountant about, right? But these are things that you absolutely want to have in place. If it's an institution you're already banking with, that also makes it easier a lot of times. You want to think about, what amenities do they have? What type of fintech, right, do they have? Do they have a mobile app? Is it going to be easy to get to your business's money, right? Those are things you consider in that regard. And then, of course, you want to think about getting some sort of general liability insurance company or insurance involved or obtained for your business. And so this was a question that Keontae asked. And again, because this is all about shielding yourself from liability, having an entity structure in place is one way, but that still doesn't mean that things aren't likely to go wrong. And so that insurance, to the extent that you haven't been, willful in whatever may have gone wrong, if you find yourself sued or things of that nature, then that's that liability insurance is going to come into play. And so Jay says, if I have a clothing line, a part of my brand that doesn't have my brand name in it, The clothes will have a logo that's totally different from my brand name. Would I trademark it to protect it? So that's a good question, Jace. I mean, it definitely depends, but the short answer is you absolutely could, to the extent that it is going to be something that, you know, you believe is unique to your company, right? And is a product that you really think is going to help to create, you know, help establish you as a household name, then I think it's absolutely worthwhile of consulting an attorney and determining if, you know, it's if you want to actually trademark it. And of course, to make sure that the name is available again, right? For trademarking before you start to market it far and wide. So yeah, I think that's definitely a great question. Let me just double check that okay, perfect. So sounds like that answered the question. Okay.
One more follow on, Amber. It sounds like, because you said this a couple of times, but it sounds like, you know, determining whether you should do your trademarks or not, or just how far you go on the IP protection. And most of this conversation depends heavily on what your end game is or what your end goals are. And so that's something that I hadn't considered before, you know, so you really got to be thinking, you know, in from the beginning type of thing. So, you know, the type of legal structure depends on the type of money you want to raise. And, you know, like, so maybe you could talk a little bit about that, like thinking ahead before you make these decisions, because it makes a difference. You know, if you're going to get an LLC and then raise certain kind of money, it doesn't work, you know, and you don't think about that until it's money raise time. So just thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, and the reality is you can always restructure, right? But it becomes expensive. You know, these are, again, it becomes, you have to invest more. Whereas if you had just maybe had a bit more foresight or consulted with someone who could help you strategize more long-term, you know, that would definitely help. But yes, it really does all depend on the end game. But the reality is I think we all plan to be successful, right? And success changes, you know, depending on the different phase of business that we're in. But one way to help you determine what success looks like for you is do some market analysis, right? What are other businesses that are doing the things that you're doing? What's their type of revenue? What are the most successful businesses, right? Or the most well-known businesses in your industry? What are their revenue, their annual revenues, things of that nature? And what type of investment did they need to get to that point? That should help you also consider, all right, what are some things I need to prepare for? What type of structure do I need in order to put myself in their position? Okay. Thanks so much, Kante, for dropping that in the chat. A link to book a consultation for us to talk about more in depth, but about your particular organization. But yes, I think that's a great question, Tremaine. And it's so much to think about. There's so much. And you don't have to necessarily think about it all at once, right? But it's important to know that at some point, you know, these things need to be taken care of. And of course, the sooner, the better. Okay. So I mentioned again, you know, this idea of obtaining general liability insurance in addition, right, to having that entity structure in place. You know, and depending on if you're like myself, like for a law firm, we need professional liability insurance, right? And that's, you know, doctors need malpractice insurance, right? So a lot of it is also industry specific. And so you want to be mindful of some of those things and think about it from an industry perspective as well. And again, look at what are some other businesses doing that are maybe where you see yourself or where you want to be, and see if you can pick their brain, right? And or an attorney that specializes in that industry to help you determine what type of insurance you need. Okay. And so then of course, then after that, you know, echoing the whole protecting your $1 billion ideas, right? We're trademarking our names, our logos, our slogans as a part of really preparing for success. And Tremaine, also, you know, in response to that question about like some things to think about of what your long-term goals are, trademarking your name, your logos, and your slogans of that nature, it signals to investors, one, that you understand the concept of intellectual property, right? But it makes your company more valuable because they're not just purchasing your company, they're purchasing those trademarks, they're purchasing that licensing ability, right? They're purchasing all those different things. So it's also about putting yourself in a better position for investment. And so you're making these investments in yourself so that other people can invest in you more confidently as well, okay? All right, so I'm a broken record in the best way, right? We're consulting with an attorney, right? We're consulting with an accountant in these instances to make sure that we're doing and purchasing the right products to protect our specific business, you know, that is, you know, specific to our industry. And again, we're looking at all these things as a legal, you know, and a, you know, tax prep, things as investments. We're not, you know, feeling as if, you know, this is just another expense that we are incurring, and the many expenses that we as founders that we incur. So, you know, that was a good amount. And so I'll just breeze through this, but I definitely want to open up the floor to questions as time is running out. But again, Keontae sent over some really great questions that I wanted to make sure we covered. But just those flip sides of those entities, right? You have your corporations and your LLCs, right? Corporations being more formal. But with that said, you don't want to operate as a sole proprietor, which is what you are if you just start offering your services, right? And you don't have any type of entity and structure in place, or if you have a business partner and you all haven't really drafted out any documents, because those LLCs and those corporations come with, you know, operating agreements or bylaws, you know, different things that govern how you manage your company. A general partnership, a sole proprietorship, you're kind of just making it up as you go, right? You don't have to have certain things in paper. And so we don't like that. We like our agreements in writing, okay? So we want to veer away from those entity structures or lack thereof, right? You don't want to be marketing too prematurely as you're still fleshing out these ideas, because your ideas are valuable and other people will see that. And so you want to be mindful of that. And then again, you don't want to look at these things as just another expense. It's just another expense. Okay, y'all? So, all right. I know we got 10 minutes left. So yeah, let me know. Hopefully that answered the questions that Keontae presented, but I'm happy to do to answer some more.
Yep, I did want to hop in, Amber, first to thank you. I know we opened up for questions, but definitely wanted to thank you. You covered pretty much every single question that anybody on social media asked, or any of those questions we compiled, from trademarks to IP to all of that. So we definitely appreciate you. But of course, as Amber said, we do want to open up and see if anybody else had any last questions, you know, that you really got to get off your chest. Feel free to hop in.
I got a quick question, Amber. I got so many questions. I'm sorry.
No,
I need a book of consultation. I got a book of consultation. All right. One real quick. So, at what point do you think somebody needs to be considering their business, like turning into a real business, getting their LLC, going for the corp? You know, because I teach entrepreneurship everywhere, and I mean, some of the people here are my former students, and I appreciate them for pulling up. But one thing that we talk about is how to validate your ideas, you know, really kind of coming up or making sure that the idea validation part is solid before you go into just willy-nilly getting LLCs and getting corps all. I mean, spending money basically before you have even gone through the process of validating the idea itself.
No, that's a great question. And, you know, I kind of broke up the do's and don'ts to, you know, kind of thinking about things from more of an ideal perspective. And then, you know, once you kind of have taken inventory of that intellectual property, you're like, all right, this is a solid idea, then that's when you will move on. But I think some other things besides just fleshing out the idea, right, is, you know, in tech, you have this idea of like product market fit, right? And you have, you know, really trying to understand, like, is there a consumer base for what I'm selling? Is there a need in the market for what I'm offering? Not just, do I love doing this, you know, and you know, is this something I could turn into an expensive hobby, right? Because that's what happens to a business that's not producing revenue. Right? Money is the lifeline of a business. And early on, I think it's important to prepare. There's going to be a point where you're probably investing more than you're getting out of your business, right? So, you know, but to the extent that you are in a position to seek investment early on, you can offset what you're personally investing. But again, you're going to have to communicate that product market fit. You're going to have to demonstrate to investors. I know we've got some investors on the call, so I know you all kind of speak to this, of what you're looking for before you actually, you know, pledge your money to an organization, right? But these are all the type of things that you want to think about, I would argue, before you form an entity. Now, of course, some other things is, you know, even if you don't think that it's something that you need lots of investment for, you know, you also just want to, again, think like, are you ready to start bringing on clients? Are you ready to start incurring liability, right? That's another thing. And it's just like, as soon as you start signing agreements and offering people things that they're going to be using, you know, you're incurring liability. So I think that's something to also keep in mind. And so, you know, the sooner the better. looking at it as an investment in terms of putting some of these different things in place is important, but you should be thinking shortly thereafter, the goal should be to start generating some revenue. Nice.
All right. I don't see any other questions, and we kind of coming up on time. Listen, did somebody else have a question?
Yeah, I have one quick question.
Hey, Rochelle.
Okay, so my name is Rochelle. I kind of joined late, so I didn't get to hear the first part. But I have a question about trademarks. So I started the trademark process earlier on. I started my business last year, November, but I started researching trademarks back in 2020, 2021. And I kept kind of getting confused on once you register your trademark, how long is your trademark valid before you have to renew that? And then with my company, I have a logo, I have a name, and then I have a slogan. So would I have to trademark those separately? And if down the line I decide to change my name or do a rebranding, would I have to re-trademark, or how would that process work?
No. So those are great questions, right? So your first question, please feel free to clarify, right, is around, what are the renewals? So are you looking to trademark something before you're actually using it in commerce, right? Before you're actually offering it to the public, or are you looking to trademark something as it's, still just an idea?
So I already kind of started my company and started like my logo, my business is up and running. Basically, I have the entities, I have everything together. I just don't have the legal trademark yet. So when I decide on when I go forward with the trademark process, how would that look? How much would it be to renew it, or what does that look like?
No, absolutely. So that's a great question. So of course, again, a lot of the stuff you can do independently. Don't recommend that. I definitely have clients who have independently registered a trademark. And what can happen is if you don't respond to correspondence from the trademark office and things of that nature, what can happen is your trademark application can become abandoned. And with everything else you have with running your business, it's really easy to miss an email or what have you. But essentially what you can do, because by already having your business up and running and maybe offering the services, your trademark will be filed as what's called a trademark that's already in use, right? An in-use application. But then there's also an intent to use application that you can file. And so there's going to be some additional fees once you actually have to file what's called a statement of use, right? If you hadn't actually been using your trademark. But since you already have, you're in a position to go ahead and trademark that. It depends on, the specific classes of goods and services, the amount of filing fees or what have you. But then there are intervals, there are 5-year and then 10-year intervals where they would want for you to, prove that you are still using the trademark. So I definitely think this is it's going to be specific to your particular, business or what have you, what categories they're filed in, right? So to the extent that you fall into multiple categories, you may need one application, but it will cost as much as having two because of the different categories of goods. So it all depends. But to the extent that you, did you have like kind of your main name or slogan, right? That would be probably what you wanted to focus on trademarking. But I think you also mentioned that, if you were to rebrand, what would that happen? Would you have to re-trademark? And arguably, yes. And I think a really good example of that is, you'll have companies that have different logos and all of them will be trademarked. And so, every iteration of them, or just kind of the name without any specific font or anything, maybe trademark. And then you have kind of the more design logo, or, the actual name in a specific font. And so, all those different things are trademarkable. So it really does just depend. And then of course, to the extent that, you're concerned about your budget, then you want to be concerned about marketing, right? Putting ideas out prematurely. But I will give y'all some free game in addition to everything else we've talked about. But this idea, you have common law trademark rights, right? So once you create a name, a slogan, whatever, assuming that it's available to do so, you can already assert some level of trademark rights to it by using the T.H.E.M symbol. So if you all ever scrolling through social media, whatever, if you see someone and all they have is a T.H.E.M in the top right-hand corner, that can either mean that they've filed a trademark registration and it hasn't been approved yet, right? So in the meantime, before they get the final registration, they're putting that TM symbol there. Or it could mean they haven't filed it yet, but they intend to. And so it's kind of just putting people on notice, like, I know this is intellectual property, right? I know I need to protect it, leave it alone. And so I would advise you to do that at this stage, right? Anything that's using your name or your logo, go ahead and put that TM symbol. But then what you'll notice is individuals who have actually gotten that registration, that's when you're going to see that R in a circle, right? That registered trademark symbol. So that is the difference between that. But yeah, let's chat. I put my contact information in the chat in terms of, how you can get in touch with me. I'm going to flip through some of those slides because unfortunately we just don't got a whole bunch of time, but let's keep in touch. Okay. And this is my contact information here. And you can reach out to me kind of in any of those channels. But the website is going to be the easiest way to be able to book a consultation or reaching out directly to our firm at this number via call or text. But she said get book Ambur today. Yes, Keontae. But no, it's a lot that goes into it. And and that's why it's so important for you to just kind of take a step back. Again, take inventory of your intellectual property, do it alongside someone else that can help you protect it, and just put yourself at ease and knowing, all right, I'm putting my best foot forward. I'm at least, availing myself to common law rights and things of that nature before I actually move forward with registrations.
That's what's up. And Rochelle's logo is dope. Like I love the girl dropping knowledge logo. Like it is fire. So make sure you throw that TM up there, Rochelle, because you be killing social media. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I know you got the IP that's going out and everything. But hey, everybody grab this information here. Please keep it up on the screen, Ambur, as we kind of wrap it up so everybody can make sure they jot down your number, your email, and all of the good information. Founder Fridays, again, I'm telling y'all, y'all missing it. Like, tell a friend. Founders Fridays is hype, man. We're giving you really good information, all the free game for you to be successful. We're going to be here, same bat time, same bat channel next week, 5 to 6 p.m. Next Friday, we talking about how to secure the bag. We got Marcus Brozier. He runs a VC firm right here in Washington, D.C., and he's going to come drop knowledge on how to secure the bag, how to get that investment. Whether it is a VC investment, not all companies are going to be VC investable. What does that mean? So how can you take the stuff that Ambur is talking about, take it to the next level, and now we want to be investable, get people to think about putting money into your business. All right, we got to wrap it. Sheila, I want to give her a quick shout out to Sheila Jones. She's one of our sponsors. So she's going to be sponsoring one of our rocket pitches that's coming up at the end of the month. So I want to give her a quick second to introduce herself. She hopped on and we thank her for being here today. Sheila, go ahead. Please introduce yourself to the group because we getting busy here on Founders Friday. So I want them to know who you are.
It's all good. It's nice to meet everyone. It's great to see in the chat all of these ideas popping out. And I'll lower my hand, but I had a quick question for Ambur. In the context of your law firm, do you span all types of IP? Is there any type of restrictions within that space?
No, thank you so much. So I specifically specialize in trademarking, okay, which is going to be reduced against those kind of creations of the mind that I mentioned, but yeah, absolutely always happy to provide referrals in terms of folks who are looking for something more specialized in terms of patents. I also offer copyrights, and for my clients in the entertainment industry, I've handled guild registrations and things of that nature for TV treatments, things of that nature. So yeah.
That's awesome. Great. So I'll just take the 30 seconds. My name is Sheila Jones, and I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was born in the DC, Maryland area, and I own my own company. Prior to owning my own company, I worked in the food business, and in that space, I was a chef for some large hotels, and then I got a couple different degrees, and I went to work for Nestle's, Camel Soup, corporate Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, up to Lancaster for another food company called Savencia Fumage and Dairy. And I've handled businesses that are about $8 billion in size. And when I see personal care and I see swimsuits and I see all this kind of stuff, all of that stuff rolled through Walmart. There's a lot of different kinds of product areas that are there. I I'm a published children's book author. I like to laugh. I'm a TEDx speaker coach, communications coach, and I just really am very happy to be with you all. I really am very much vested into young entrepreneurs and them finding their way. I can't tell you how many pitches I saw at Walmart. You know, these people coming in with their products on the open to buys, the made in the USA pitches. I used to have about 250 companies that supported my business divisions. And I was always running innovation sessions, bringing in hundreds and hundreds of products on a quarterly basis to screen those products and to validate the business opportunity with Walmart. So anything that I can help you all with, please feel free to reach out to me. I put my link in the chat box earlier, but I'll be around because Jermaine has allowed me to come every Friday if I want.
I told she to hop in every Friday when she wants to, but yeah, she has a ton of knowledge about what big box stores are looking for. She literally ran a $8 billion arm of Walmart. And so if you want to get it on the shelves of a Walmart, of a Target, of a 5 and below, you know, she knows the ins and outs of what these big box stores are looking for. She brings a lot of knowledge in that space. So we would definitely have to dedicate time to, you know, getting in big box if that's something that you're interested in. All right, listen, it's 6 o'clock. Founders Fridays. Tell a friend. Next week, we're talking about getting a bag. We got a VC that's coming in. Talk about investing in your business, what you need to do to be investable. Links going out real soon for next week. Look out for us on social media. And last but certainly not least, book Amber. We'll see y'all next week. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Amber.
Having me.
Thanks, Amber.